Good afternoon. It's Chapter 6 today, International Trade Theory. Bear with me a second. Okay. Our learning objectives today are understand why nations trade with each other, summarize the different theories explaining trade flows between nations, and recognize why many economists believe that unrestricted free trade between nations will raise the economic welfare of countries that participate in a free trade system. Explain the arguments of those who maintain that government can play a proactive role in promoting national competitive advantage in certain industries, and also understand the important implications that international trade theory holds for management practice. Also, we are in really interesting economic times as I speak, given the fact that the Trump administration has decided to overhaul international trade with all of our trading partners. The administration feels that there are many unfair deals where we are allowing international trade come in to our country from other countries without any tariffs, and then we are subject to tariffs for bringing product into their country. So there's no reciprocity going on. So what he's trying to do is equalize the playing field so that if we are being charged tariffs to bring product into international markets, those countries also will be charged to bring those products into our market. So we'll see what happens, but tariff trade wars have no winners. And the longer it happens, the more negative the consequences could become. What I think is going to happen, this is my personal opinion, I think this is just a negotiating stance, and also people get scared and then they come to the negotiating table. And Trump is infamous for using, there's a word called bluster, and that's one of his most important negotiating gambits. So we'll see what happens. Okay, let's move forward. Cross-border trade, it's dramatically grown in the past 70 years, but there's been a recent acceleration of value in traded services. And you do have something called gains from trade. Countries that specialize in the production and export of goods and services that they produce most efficiently, while importing goods and services that they cannot produce so efficiently from other nations. There's a shift in policy away from free trade towards something called managed trade. Free trade, government does not attempt to influence through quotas or duties or tariffs what its citizens can buy from another country or what they can produce and sell to another country. It's Adam Smith's theory of absolute advantage, it's David Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage, and it's Heckscher-Ohlin theory. The gains from trade. Trade theories explain why international trade is beneficial, even for products a country can produce itself, and it allows something called specialization. Limits on imports are often in the interest of domestic producers, but not domestic consumers. The pattern of international trade. Much of the observed pattern of international trade is difficult to explain. Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage focuses on differences in labor productivity. Heckscher-Ohlin theory focuses on factors of production, and Verdin's product life cycle theory focuses on production location changes as products become more widely accepted. Krugman's new trade theory focuses on first mover advantage. In this picture here, a Rolex Group logo sits on display above a luxury wristwatch store in Vienna. I don't believe that's what this picture is, but okay. Trade theory and government policy. Mercantilism advocates government involvement in promoting exports and limiting imports. Smith, Ricardo, and Heckscher-Ohlin call for unrestricted free trade. New trade theory and Porter's competitive advantage theory justify limited government intervention for certain export-oriented industries. Mercantilism. It emerged in 16th century England. Gold and silver are mainstays of national wealth, and it is in a country's best interest to maintain a trade surplus, to export more than it imports. It advocates government intervention to achieve a surplus in the balance of trade. Flaw is that it views trade as a zero-sum game. A gain by one country results in a loss by another. Adam Smith, 1776, he wrote The Wealth of Nations, attacked the mercantilist assumption of a zero-sum game, and he promoted something called absolute advantage. Country has an absolute advantage in producing a product when it is more efficient than any other country at producing it. Countries should specialize in the production of goods for which they have an absolute advantage and then trade these goods for goods produced by other countries. Both countries benefit from specialization and trade, so it's more than a zero-sum game here. The theory of absolute advantage is represented here in graphic where we have rice and we have cocoa. David Ricardo, 1817, Principles of Political Economy, postulated that promoted comparative advantage, that a country should specialize in the production of goods it produces most efficiently, and buy the goods it produces less efficiently from other countries, even it can produce those goods more efficiently itself. The gains from trade. Potential world production is greater with unrestricted free trade than with restricted trade. The theory of comparative advantage suggests that trade is a positive-sum game in which all countries that participate realize economic gains. Qualifications and assumptions. Simple world with two countries and two goods. No transportation costs, no difference in price of resources, and resources can move freely. Constant returns to scale. Each country has a fixed stock of resources, and free trade does not change the efficiency with which a country uses its resources. No effective trade on income distribution within a country. Extensions of the Ricardian model. Immobile resources. Resources do not always move easily from one economic activity to another. Political opposition to a free trade regime typically comes from those whose jobs are most at risk. With the extensions of the Ricardian model continued, diminishing returns. Comparative advantage model assumes constant returns to specialization. It's more realistic to assume diminishing returns to specialization because not all resources are the same quality and different goods use resources in different proportions. Dynamic effects and economic growth. Free trade can result in two types of dynamic gains. What's that? Yes, the first one, increase a country's stock of resources as increased supplies of labor and capital from abroad become available within the country. And anyone want to take a hazard to guess on what number two is? That's right, Sharon. Increase the efficiency with which a country uses its resources. Dynamic gains in both the stock of a country's resources and the efficiency with which resources are utilized will cause a country's PPF to shift outward. Trade, jobs, and wages. The Samuelson critique. Paul Samuelson asks, what happens when a rich country enters into a free trade agreement with a poor country that rapidly improves its productivity after the introduction of a free trade regime? Lower prices may not make up for lower wages in the U.S. Concerned with offshoring service jobs, and historically free trade has benefited wealthy countries. Introducing protectionist measures may also be harmful to the U.S. Extensions of the Ricardian model continued. Evidence of the link between trade and growth. Countries that adopt a more open stance toward international trade enjoy higher growth rates than those that close their economies to trade. Sachs and Warner created a measure of how to open international trade and economy was, and questions about the impact of tariff barriers. Heckscher-Ohlin theory, factor endowments. Comparative advantage arises from differences in national factor endowments, extent to which a country is endowed with resources such as land, labor, and capital. Countries will export goods that make intensive use of factors that are locally abundant. Countries that import goods that make intensive use of factors that are locally scarce. The Leontief paradox raised questions about the validity of the Heckscher-Ohlin theory, found that U.S. exports were less capital intensive than U.S. imports. The product life cycle theory. Raymond Vernon's product life cycle theory. For most of the 20th century, most new products were developed and first sold in the U.S. Due to the wealth and size of the U.S. market and cost-saving process innovations, limited initial demand necessitates some exports early in product lifecycle. Over time, demand grows in other countries, the product becomes standardized, and the price becomes the main competitive weapon. Other countries can now produce product at lower costs, limiting the potential for U.S. exports. Historically, it's an accurate theory, but it now seems ethnocentric and increasingly dated. New trade theory, economies of scale, cost reductions associated with large-scale production can have important implications for international trade. Trade can increase the variety of goods available to consumers and decrease the average cost of those goods. The global market may support only a small number of enterprises or industries in which the output required to attain economies of scale represents a significant proportion of total world demand. Increasing product variety and reducing costs. What would happen in a world without trade? The variety of goods a country can produce and the scale of production are limited by the size of the market, low volumes, and higher costs. What happens in a world with trade? Individual national markets are combined into a larger world market. Each nation can increase the variety of goods and lower the cost of those goods. Economies of scale, first mover advantages, and the pattern of trade. First mover advantages include economic and strategic advantages accruing to the first to enter a market. Also can gain a scale-based cost advantage, and later entrants find it almost impossible to match. Implications of new trade theory. Nations may benefit from trade even when they do not differ in resource endowments or technology. A country may predominate in the export of a good simply because it was lucky enough to have one or more firms among the first to produce that good. It may create a barrier to entry, and it's useful in explaining trade patterns. And lastly, it argues for government intervention and strategic trade policy. Makes sense? I think it does. Moving on. National competitive advantage, Porter's diamond. Porter believed existing theories only told part of the story. Wanted to explain why a nation achieves international success in a particular industry. 4 broad attributes of a nation shape the environment in which local firms compete. Number 1, factor endowments. Number 2, demand conditions. Number 3, related and supporting industries. And lastly, number 4, firm strategy, structure, and rivalry. In this diagram here, the determinants of national competitive advantage is represented by Porter's diamond, and the chart is shaped like a diamond. The first thing we have is firm strategy, structure, and rivalry, demand conditions, related and supporting industries, and factor endowments. And this goes back and forth, and each one of them can lead back and forth to the other. Porter's 4 attributes constitute the diamond. Firms are most likely to succeed in industries or industry segments where the diamond is most favorable. The diamond is a mutually reinforcing system. 2 additional variables can influence the national diamond: chance, and then, of course, government. Factor endowments, basic factors, natural resources, climate, location, demographics. They can provide an initial advantage. Some of the advanced factors include communication infrastructure, sophisticated and skilled labor, research facilities, and technological know-how are a product of investment by individuals, companies, and governments. Demand conditions. Firms gain competitive advantage if their domestic consumers are sophisticated and demanding. Related and supporting industries. Investments in advanced factors of production by related and supporting industries can help the industry achieve a strong competitive position internationally. Successful industries within a country tend to be grouped into clusters of related industries. Firm strategy, structure, and rivalry. Different nations are characterized by different management ideologies, which may or may not help them build national competitive advantage. Strong association between vigorous domestic rivalry and the creation and persistence of competitive advantage in an industry. When we're taking a look at and evaluating Porter's theory, we can see that government can influence each component either positively or negatively, depending, of course, on their policy decisions and also the political party that is in power. Factor endowments can be affected by subsidies, policies toward capital markets, policies towards education, and more. It can shape domestic demand through local product standards or with regulations. It also can influence firm rivalry through capital market regulation, tax policy, and antitrust laws. Porter's theory has not been subjected to detailed empirical testing. In the 360 view, managerial implications, location, first mover advantages, and government policy. Location from a profit perspective, firms should disperse production to countries where they can be performed most efficiently. Makes sense, right? First mover advantages, it pays to invest substantial financial resources in building an early advantage. Government policy, businesses can exert a strong influence on government trade policy. We see this now when we have the Trump administration issuing tariffs all across the board. According to Porter, government should invest in education, infrastructure, and basic research. I thank you for listening. Have a great day.